Shannon Bream, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
I am honored and privileged.
First off, I have to say, I know I've congratulated you in person, but congratulations again on your ascension to the top of Fox News Sunday.
Thank you so much.
It's so deserved and wonderful to have you in that spot.
Thank you.
It's also especially demanding to do so in an election season, I would think, when you have all these different spinning plates. How do you approach the job, especially when it comes to, analyzing the run-up to this Super Bowl of an election in a way that will allow voters and viewers to kind of gain greater understanding of what's going on behind the scenes or the overarching stories at play?
I would guess that you and I are very similar, as a lot of our colleagues. Like, we love the data. I love it. Every time there's more internal polling, external polling, anything that comes in, anecdotal stuff. We have amazing reporters who are flooded across the country. So when they tell us, like, there are this many people showing up at this candidate's events and then this many showing up at the opposing, like, those kinds of things give you a little bit of color and flavor that you don't just get from the numbers. But I love kind of synthesizing all of that data and then going out with the best that we can to explain to people what's happening. I mean, when polling is within the margin of error, as it is in almost every one of the big Senate races, or within a point or two, all you can do is make your best educated guess and tell people about those anecdotal things, I think, that help fill out the story.
I know that you obviously have been paying attention to and in Washington for a long time. You know what's going on and the dynamics that are there. This midterm seems very odd to me for a number of different reasons. But a big part of it seems to be that this is the first post-Roe, post-Dobbs election. And that was certainly something that dominated the media conversation there for a couple of months. What do you think we're going to learn in the coming week about the way that plays politically within the context of a midterm?
I think because there are some states that have abortion measures on the ballot, in addition to a Senate or gubernatorial race or whatever, and all the House races that are out there, it'll be interesting. I think that's going to aid Democrats in every state that happened. Michigan is the one that comes to mind the most because you've got some really tight races there. But when you look at the fact that they had a ruling there was a legal fight over it, but the Michigan State Supreme Court said, yes, you can have that abortion measure on the ballot. That helps Democrats, I think, in those Michigan, especially for Governor Whitmer and Tudor Dixon, that really tight race there. But I think Democrats peaked on that issue over the summer, and they know that now. But in some markets, they spent 10-1. The dollar's talking about abortion versus the economy. Now you've got already the blame game and the pointing, fingers, and you've got Democrats saying, like, we didn't listen to voters. We should have talked to them about the economy. So it'll be interesting to see if that stuff's overblown or not when the dust settles.
There was this interesting Wall Street Journal report, which I'm sure you saw, based on their poll data and a couple of other points of emphasis, that a big shift has happened among suburban women who obviously shifted toward the Democrats in 2020, but now it looks like they're shifting back toward Republicans. They can pick the issue there, but obviously those are women who Democrats thought they could activate with the abortion issue. If it turns out that they were not successful doing that, what do you think some of the explanations could be?
I think the economy is first and foremost, because the abortion issue, yes, will be in and out of women's lives in different ways, in personal or family or whatever issue that they walk through it. It's not in their life every day, like buying groceries and gassing up the car. And what's happening with their kids in school. I think these mama bears kind of woke up during COVID and got very frustrated about, what are my kids learning? How is this happening in school? So, listen, my mom was a teacher for 40 years. I think there are amazing teachers out there who you go into this because you love kids. And it's a really much like a servanthood kind of job to be in that classroom and doing that work. But I think that more broadly, sometimes these parents look at maybe union leadership or some of these school boards that they say, whoa, this is not the curriculum I thought my kid was getting. So between that and now looking at the test scores showing their kids are a year or two behind, I think those mama bears are still very angry about that kind of stuff. And that translates more into their daily life than I think the Dobbs decision overturning Roe v. Wade.
Another oddity of this midterm seems to be a shift in Joe Biden's character. And bear with me for a moment. Batya Ungar-Sargon, a couple of other smart writers on the left who I follow have been making this point for a couple of months now, that basically Joe Biden won, and I was there in South Carolina when he won the nomination based on the fact that he was the one who was above the Twitter mob, where everybody else got kind of sucked into the social media based priorities and thinking that those mattered most. He was doing kind of this older political game and one that was targeted more at big issues. But now this White House seems to be performing in the exact opposite fashion. And from my perspective, it's creating a divide between the people who are on the phone and on the tablet and the people who are at the table. Because if you have these issues, if you look at social media, you would think maybe that the biggest issues are abortion and climate and, certainly I think guns, as shootings happen and things like that. But if you're at the kitchen table, those aren't the issues that you're talking about every night. Why do you think that divide is happening with this White House?
It's so interesting. Someone way smarter than me, Britt Hume, our longtime political chief around here, he had an interesting analysis. We were talking about this today, and he said those 2 Senate seats in Georgia that went to President Biden may have been his undoing in some ways, because once that happened, he felt very emboldened that he had more of a governing majority than you really do when you're in a 50-50 Senate with the vice president to break all the ties. That's not a mandate. But there was something they think, that when we talk about this, that a lot of analysts think triggered in him, then thinking like, okay, I'm sort of riding this wave. We took both of those seats. This was supposed to, be beneficial to the Republicans. We all know what happened there in Georgia and how that played out. But they think, a lot of people think that kind of emboldened him to say, well, I don't have to be the super moderate that I campaigned I was going to be. He's got a ton of pressure from the left. You see him when he's got people shouting him down out there on the campaign trail, and he's like, that's it. No more drilling. We're not doing drilling. Talking about getting rid of the coal plants. I mean, things that, if you're Senator Joe Manchin at this point, are you not feeling kind of punched in the gut that your vote got the Inflation Reduction Act across the line, and the deal that you made, the side deal, is probably not going to come to fruition? So, when President Biden feels more emboldened and pulled to the left out there, it may hurt his party in this midterm.
The reaction to a negative midterm has been different. We saw what happened in 1994. And that obviously led Bill Clinton to triangulate, to listen to Dick Morris, to find ways to work with Newt Gingrich to get welfare reform done, that kind of thing, balance a budget. But then you also saw the reaction that Barack Obama had to kind of double down. And essentially it ended his legislative focus as president. It became more about nominations and things like that, foreign policy steps. What do you expect, having observed Joe Biden and his approach to this and the approach of his White House? Do you think that there will be a pivot after this potentially negative midterm, or do you think they're just going to double down and kind of do the same thing that the Obama White House did?
I don't know what you think, but it feels to me like a double down situation. There's always been this traditional meeting with the press after the midterms that the president will come and field questions and really spend time with the press. And as of this morning, the White House press corps said they have not gotten any kind of—
I was going to ask you about that.
They haven't gotten any kind of reassurance from the White House that he's actually going to do that, which suggests to me, listen, he hasn't listened to the analysts and the strategists who've said, pull back from these. And that includes former President Obama, who said repeatedly, like, you guys need to be careful when you do all this woke stuff, that people feel like they're walking on eggshells and they don't want to be preached to. And they're going to walk away from that and go where they feel more comfortable. So listen, he hasn't listened to a lot of people he's got voices all over the place, I'm sure, trying to tell him what to do as commander in chief, but he's the president and he will make his own decisions. I hope he does that presser. If not, that signals to me that we're getting a double down.
Personally, every time Obama says something like that, I feel this bittersweet feeling of like, why didn't you say that when you were president?
Right, anyway, let's find a way to the middle.
So when it comes to this midterm, I'm sure that there are certain elections that seem more interesting to you in terms of indicating the direction of the country. What are a couple of races that stick out to you that you're going to be paying particular attention to as indications of certain things or certain storylines that are going on?
I think if some really crazy things happen for Republicans, whether they pull the Senate seat in New Hampshire or even Washington State, the fact that we're even talking about that is not good for the Democrats. If they pull either or both of those seats, I think that this is going to be the tsunami. Now, a lot of people are saying it's not. It's going to be a red trickle. It's not going to be a red wave or red tsunami. We just won't know because these polls are so tight. But if something happened early in the night, like Republicans pulled off New Hampshire, then I'd be like, oh boy, the electorate is really frustrated. As we know, they always are in that first midterm. They punish the president in power. They punish his party. If those things don't happen and we feel like we have a more moderate situation, I think there are several House races in Virginia that we're all watching to see how those go and whether it's a decent night, a good night, or a great night for Republicans, because I think all of the predictions fall into one of those categories.
Yeah. I mean, if you see, you can focus on Virginia 7 as kind of being the point where they're, okay, that's a wave, but if 10 goes, then, I mean, that seems
we
more
sound so
tsunami.
wonky right now.
Yeah, I know.
But I suspect that your listeners are very much on the same page. Like they know what Virginia 7 and 10 is. They know.
Hung Cow, yes.
They know.
They know. The conversation that happens in Washington, this time around has focused overwhelmingly on January 6th, on insurrection, on democracy is in danger at the ballot. Do you think that Democrats will have any regret off of devoting so much of their energy to that over the past really 6 to 8 months? They've been talking about this, even though the polls seem to indicate this was never really catching on as something that voters prioritized.
I think you're already seeing that and hearing that in these pieces that are coming out with the finger pointing and like Democrats are already blaming each other about we didn't listen and we didn't focus on the economy. But there's something that must have indicated to them that this was a winning issue for them. It definitely is going to motivate their base. But when you see the president had that primetime speech last week, arguably, 7:00 Eastern time, when you have an evening speech like that, and that's the closing argument is all that if you vote for the right side of the ticket, the country's over. I don't know that you bring in swing voters or independents. I don't know that they're going, listen, your base wanted to hear that speech that you gave, but they were already with you. Yeah. So, when you hear people now being quoted, in all these pieces saying like, we should have done X, they're already having the postmortem.
More than one football coach has used this quote over the years, but you know what they call a moral victory? A loss.
Right. So that might be what they get. And there's so much speculation that this huge red thing. And once the media is kind of on board with that, they've started a few weeks ago with the managing of expectations. Like when Democrats were surging, are the polls wrong? Could the Democrats be caught off guard? I think they've been managing expectations for a few weeks too.
So obviously we have to talk about former President Trump, the elephant in the room. He certainly is widely expected to announce, perhaps as early as tonight now.
Oh boy!
People pushing for it. I doubt that.
Let the dust settle on this one. We got to figure out what's happening in the Senate.
We have so many things to do. But when he does announce, because I don't see at this point any indication that he won't, that's going to be a very early announcement. It's going to be very, ahistorical in the modern era to announce that early. Just, looking at it from that lens, do you think that is a mistake, just given that the risks associated with it seem to be bigger, and he could obviously just kind of wait to jump in whenever he wants?
And he knows the power of a tease. Like he understands messaging.
It seems so out of character to me,
Right, but I think he's been so champing at the bit to do this. I mean, out there with the rallies, which he gets these amazing turnouts, and he's like, you're going to be very, 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 very happy soon. But I think we all know, like, when you're building to the announcement, like, people really want the big payoff, but like, why not make them wait a little longer, make thousands more come to your rallies and figure it out. And plus you wonder if it gets sort of, listen, it's going to be huge whenever he does it, but it kind of falls between these holiday season and Thanksgiving, Christmas. Like, why not wait and come out of the gate at the beginning of the year or something where you'd really have the full eyeballs and audience that aren't going to be distracted by anything else?
It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and it seems, like I said, it seems out of character for him. He loves to tease things on. He loves to tease them on way longer.
And maybe he is with this, date that's been floated out there. November 14th, he's going to do it. And maybe he does, a social media post that day, like, I've got something to say soon. Stay tuned. Maybe the tease continues because he knows we're all waiting.
He made this remark about Ron DeSantis, which from my perspective went over like a lead balloon.
He loves a nickname, though.
He does love a nickname, but he also tests the nicknames,
right?
And the test, I don't think. I think the test was go back to the Comedy Cellar, needs some work. Yeah. But the thing that was interesting about the reaction to that was there were some people who were saying, he really does, he is irritated by DeSantis, that kind of thing. But his supporters love DeSantis. There's the overlap there is a circle. The
Venn diagram is just all circles on top of it.
Exactly. And so it doesn't, I guess from my perspective, I don't understand why you would start with that. I feel like it's something that you would use when the time is right.
Yeah.
Do you think that's an indication that DeSantis really is kind of under his skin?
I think he has to be. I mean, where does that nickname come from? If Trump feels no threat from DeSantis, I don't think we get that nickname at the rally down there. So I think is it a brushback pitch, to kind of say to the governor? But there was consternation among a lot of GOP folks I heard from were like, don't do this when DeSantis is in the middle of this election, which he's leading by, in some polls, double digits. But wait, let him get through his thing. He's governor again. He's been reelected. If things go according to the polls, and then start, the picking at him. But it suggests to me a little bit of insecurity from the former president about the governor.
One thing that I do think is interesting is that this time around, the money is probably going to behave very differently. You probably saw that report in Politico about Ken Griffin, and there's a number of other big donors on the GOP side who are basically like, we liked Trump, we backed him, we gave to him when he was running again, but we want to move on. And the difference is that last time around in 2016, money was all spread out all over the place. You had tons of money with Jeb. You had all this money going in different directions. Cruz and Rubio, and then tons of money spent on attacking Rubio, blowing him out of the water, which seems ridiculous in retrospect. This time around, it seems like the money is there for DeSantis. Does this create a danger that getting in early, as the former president is likely to do, that money finds its way to sort of saying, we're all going to line up behind one guy. And whether that makes a difference or not in the ultimate nomination, it does strengthen them as a candidate.
I think it pushes everybody's timelines, and it does push that money if you start 2 years out. We always know the campaign is kind of happening, but, you read the piece that's talking about the money to DeSantis. He clearly has support. It's awkward for him because he's running for reelection to his post there in Florida and saying, oh, I'm focused on that right now. But in the back of his mind has to be a conversation about 24. I'm hearing a lot of people and money talking about Youngkin.
Yes.
In Virginia, too. He would be, and the chatter I hear surrounding him is that his people feel like if Trump gets in and is really, like we all expect to do, making a run at it, that Youngkin is sort of the alternative to him in that he found a way to thread the needle in purple Virginia and get this thing done. But you know him. If you've spent any time around him or Suzanne, his wife, he's very much the opposite of Trump in that he's a smart businessman. They both have the strong business background there, but Youngkin wants to take the high road. Now, will that work in a campaign against Trump? It's going to be rough. Anybody who gets in once President Trump is in, they're going to be ready for a beating.
Yes.
They know it's coming.
Just a couple questions before we finish up about your approach to the job. Sunday shows used to dominate conversation. I certainly remember, my father would have the VCR set up to record
the VCR.
Meet the Press so that we could watch it when we got home from church.
Yes.
And he would watch it, and he would be angry if something preempted it or if
the tape doesn't work or whatever.
Et cetera. And so we got to see Tim Russert go into all of these interviews where he would manage to oftentimes hammer people with, past comments and things like that, but also seem not so much confrontational, but, just drawing out the truth about the thing that he was trying to get to. Yet today, Sunday shows barely make any news. They don't register in the same way that they used to. How do you plan to change that?
I love that you have all this time to research. And I do love to I think, Tim Russert was a model in so many respects, but to hammer people with their own votes, their own words, it's something we did with Congressman Clyburn this week. Like he was denying saying something. We had just run the soundbite. Then I'm reading it back to him. So I think that when you present people with their own information, you can do it with a smile, but be firm with people. So to me, I like the Russert model and that you're having a conversation with people. I think when any of us try to go about something to have a gotcha moment, just for the sake of having a gotcha moment, you can have that when you confront people with their stuff. But I think if the conversation is just about making yourself the headline or the superstar or whatever, you miss a conversation possibility that helps the viewers to actually get insight into people or get some information. But I do think one of the most effective things is to just know everything about that person who's coming on the air, how they voted ever, since 1973.
Shannon's answer is to know everything.
I like to know everything. But we're doing different things too. We have people on like athletes and we have sports stories. We have faith stuff. We've got musicians. So we're trying to do things that take you outside the Beltway too, in addition to the hardcore political conversation, which I think you can do with a smile.
I think that, one of the big things that I miss is that lengthy interview and the interviews where you would have some competing ideas basically back to back in a way that would really provide the viewers kind of they could watch one segment and say, man, he's really given that Democrat, the business on this and be sort of rah-rah, and then have a Republican come on and treat them with that same level of firmness in order to get at what's going on here. In the age of the politician soundbite, though, how do you get through that? How do you punch through kind of the veneer of talking points that they've all memorized?
Well, the minute they start doing that, we had Governor Stitt on, the Republican in Oklahoma, who is in a surprisingly tough race. And that's a weird one because his opponent was a Democrat until last year, or a Republican flipped to Democrat to run against him. So it's almost like Republican and Republican light. Some people would argue run against each other. And so I'd asked him a question about these accusations that he's been mired in scandal. And he starts giving an answer that's not really going to that. And we had a weird delay, like you do sometimes on these remote interviews. And I was like, Governor, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to step on you here, but you're not answering the question about this federal audit and how you use this money, or the state investigation, or these accusations that you were funneling, taxpayer subsidy benefits to your business. Like, I just got to stop you in the middle of the answer because it sounds good and they've rehearsed it. They prepare for Sunday shows. But I need you to answer the question I asked. So I think that, interrupting their train of thought is unsettling for them, but it's where you get the most information.
Last question. You have gone through the experience of covering a number of these, obviously. Do you have any, and this is a question I asked Brett, it's a question I asked Bill Hemmer. Do you have any tricks or recommendations about how to sustain yourself at that TV level of energy for, an 8-hour clip or something like that when you have to go late into the night?
I'm decaf. So I don't do any caffeine. So when I see people with Red Bulls and stuff, I'm like, whoa. So I don't. I try not to eat like total crap because there's junk food everywhere. I know I'm going to feel better if I stay hydrated, if I get sleep wherever I can. We don't get a ton of sleep during these weeks, but we love what we do. So I think in part we're just running off adrenaline. Just try to pace yourself. You know?
I actually, even though I consume a ton of caffeine, I try not to overdo it. Because I feel like it's
a fine line.
There's a fine line. You can get kind of jittery and sort of.
I gave it up about 5 or 6 years ago, and it made a huge difference in the way that I sleep, in the way that I feel, and so I feel it was hell getting off of it. So I'm like, I can't go back there. I can't do that detox again.
Shannon, thank you so much for taking the time to join me.
My treat.